The right wing does not care about free speech at all. And I'm going to expose and translate politics and explain why the right wing pretends to care about free speech. So the first thing is, it's not only because the right wing doesn't actually care about free speech. They just want to be able to, post, like propaganda and disinformation to brainwash people and to manipulate people. So they don't make moves to protect free speech. They make moves to have free speech just so they can push propaganda and disinformation. That's the first thing that ultimately is the reason why the right wing pretends to care about free speech, because they just want the ability to push as much propaganda on on social media platforms as much as possible, without the government basically or anti-corruption bodies basically getting in the way and stopping them from doing the propaganda. So that's the first thing. So it's just basically about them having free reign to push propaganda on the internet and on social media sites. The other reason why the right wing pretends to care about free speech, or the fake conservatives pretend to care about free speech, is because that they know that the propaganda and the disinformation that they do, and the targeting of minorities and vulnerable communities, whether it's the LGBTQ, whether it's the mentally ill, whether it's people on benefits or the disabled, they know that what they do on these propaganda channels, they know it's extremely dangerous. They know that they're exploiting vulnerable people's psychology and mental health. They know what they're doing is borderline domestic terrorism, where not only does their racist propaganda, where they basically normalize white supremacist talking points, not only does that radicalize people to the far right, where they can actually potentially commit to violent extremism, they also create disastrous consequences in society, where they indoctrinate people, they feed people propaganda and lies, and feeding people anti-facts, to the point where it creates arguments, because they're brainwashing people, they're normalizing bigotry, and then it causes arguments between friendships and families. So the right wing knows that not only is the propaganda they do extremely toxic, but it's borderline domestic terrorism. If they're pushing people to violence, whether it's the far right, whether it's destroying friendships and families. Another thing that they do is they lie about mental health and psychology, trying to say mental health has gone too far in the middle of a mental health crisis. They know that they're trying to bring back the stigma around mental health, and basically trying to convince people to ignore people's issues by labeling it as victim culture. So with all these disastrous consequences that they're creating in society, they just pretend to care about free speech, because they know that what they do, the propaganda that they push online, is extremely dangerous. And then that comes back, and verging on domestic terrorism. And that's why they pretend, and that goes back to the first point as to why they're pretending to care about free speech, because they just want the ability to push far right-wing propaganda and disinformation without any, corruption bodies basically getting in the way. And they also, and the reason why they want to push propaganda and disinformation is so that they can highly propagandize people where they don't know facts, where they exploit their lack of understanding of minority groups, whether it's the LGBTQ or whether it's immigrants, and it's all because they want to propagandize people so people don't vote for their rights. So people don't know the facts, that people don't vote for the facts, and they're just voting down to, these people demonizing vulnerable communities and enabling people's like bigotry and like non-understanding towards queer people and trans people. So they only pretend to care about free speech because they want to openly push propaganda. They know what they do is extremely dangerous for society and has disastrous consequence from society. But also, what it's all about is basically propaganda, having all this propaganda and disinformation online. It's all about controlling people for votes, and that's why they pretend to care about free speech. And the thing is that they don't care about free speech, because one example is, like, in Reform in the UK, basically wants to, well, not only force Christianity in schools, which would be a breach of parental freedoms, but it's also a breach of free speech. But they also want to, through propaganda, talking about like lying about, teaching people about being compassionate towards minorities or immigrants, teaching people about LGBTQ issues. They're calling it like woke ideology. They're using that as an excuse to take authority and control of education, and they basically want to stop people like having open discussion about different political issues, whether it's compassionate towards migrants or the LGBT, teaching about the LGBTQ. So they want to control education and stop open discussion. So they basically want to stop free speech in schools. So clearly they don't care about free speech if they are actually trying to take authority and control of education. And also in America with Trump, he's basically like intimidating schools to of threatening withholding funding if they stop talking about LGBT, about different minorities, and if they don't stop DEI. So academic freedom is linked to free speech. So quite clearly, the right wing doesn't actually care about free speech at all. And also, when you criticize them, they threaten to take you to court, things like that, which means that they can't take criticism, which is a part of free speech. And they don't care about free speech, because the moment you criticize them and you say something that they don't like exposing their corruption, then they basically threaten to sue you. So they clearly don't care about free speech. And like in America, Donald Trump basically intimidated social media sites to change their algorithm, which is government interference, which is a breach of free speech. But anyway, that's me exposing and translating, why the right wing is pretending to care about free speech when clearly they don't. Because if they get into power, they are going to stop open debate and discussion in schools of different issues, like issues around LGBTQ. But anyway, it's all so they can push propaganda and disinformation, so they can manipulate people to, and this is how they rig elections, is through propaganda and disinformation. They do it through psychologically manipulating people, through validating of people's biases. Because once you validate people's biases, they believe everything that these political commentators say. And so it's all ultimately about controlling and propagandizing people to get into power, and manipulating people to get into power. That's what it's all about. So they don't actually care about free speech at all. So anyway, that's the video. If you got this far, please like and subscribe if you can. I would really appreciate it. And if you want to learn more about politics, mental health, and some philosophy, then stay tuned into the Pioneer of True Centrism show. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you very much.